So if you want to go through program accounting, and then you can do chart of accounts, if you have the buttons up, you can use that button. There are some things in this window that are super important, and then some things that are very helpful in another reporting window for your chart of accounts. Okay, now that we see, can everybody see this okay? Let me just a little bit, because with accounting, this is like everything seems so tiny. All right, so you have a couple of tabs. If you look up at the top, you have your balance sheet accounts. Those are what? Your incomes, or your assets, liabilities, and funds. Those are the things that show up on that report. So those are your balance sheet accounts. Then you have your income and expense accounts. That is these get connected to a fund balance. So, for example, I have a type, so it's income or it's expense. Then I have the numbers. Now let me talk real quick about those numbers. CDM has a basic structure of numbers that we recommend. Is it required? No. It's just something that we recommend. Do I think it's a great one to use? Yeah. Partially it's what I've known, but I do understand it. Here's what it is. Assets are in the 1000s. Liabilities, 2000s. Funds, 3000s. Income accounts are 4000s. And then expense are 5,000 and above. Why do you think that's important to either do it that way or at least in some sort of structure like that? Anybody want to give a guess as to why it's important to have it split out and broke down like that? So what if I am troubleshooting something and I noticed when I printed an income report, it had a figure in brackets for the 4,000 number. And I can't figure out why that is. Well, I go and I look at that, reference number or what have you, and I notice that it was a check that was written. I wrote a check against a 4,000 number. Instantly, I know it's wrong. 4,000s are income numbers. I don't write a check against an income number because I didn't make the money, I'm spending the money. So 4,000s are the income numbers. Well, because you're seeing that in there, you don't have to go research and see where that account number is. You just know instantly that was an income number, or instantly a fund number was used, and that's why it didn't print on the income and expense report, and so on. Does that make sense? Another way that it can be, helpful is, all right, we have 4,000 as an income. There was a user I had one time. They couldn't figure out why in their giving funds, when they printed an income report, they were missing like over half of their deposits. And they were pointed to 4,000, so they knew it was income, but they couldn't figure it out. Well, when I pulled up their chart of account, they'd created an asset number for 4,000 as well. It's not a duplicate number because it's an asset instead of an income. Well, guess what happened? She typed in 4,000. She knew that was right when she put it and set up her funds. She got all that taken care of, went to post. Guess what it did? Posted to her asset. Did it show up on her income and expense report? Nope, because she used an asset. But if you keep your assets in the same vein, the same number, you know right away that that's an asset versus an expense number versus an income. So there are a couple of reasons why it's important. It's just the biggest is visually. In fact, there are times that you can, while it's 5,000, but it's 5,000 and above. So like our youth camp account numbers were in the 8,000s. Our missions were, 6,000s, for example. So then we just knew because, I don't know about your guys' chart of accounts, but my goodness, the Northern Ohio State Office chart of accounts was something else. There was a lot. They were very detailed. They used a lot of account numbers. It's not wrong. There was just a lot. So she would break that down because the youth department probably had, it would be exaggerating to say they had 100, but it was a lot. And so maybe not. And my grandma, I swear she knew every single number by heart. When I did the finances at my church, I'm hoping I remembered that 4,000 was the tithe account. She just knew. She could tell you. And but we had it structured like that because we did have way more expense numbers than we did income numbers because they wanted to be more detailed with what they spent the money for. So like with camp, they wanted an expense number for canteen. They wanted an expense number for the store. They wanted an expense number for whatever. You know, you didn't have to. You could just have an expense number for canteen/store. They just, over the years, some directors wanted it a little more detailed than others. I prefer the detail. Again, it's easier to quickly, especially when it comes to camp, how much did we make or lose on canteen versus the store? Well, we can easily find that out. How much did you spend? I can just separate that. Yeah, I could print it and just kind of figure that out and just combine it and say, together we did this and lost this, or I could break it down even more. But when we're creating our chart of accounts or we're adding things to the chart of accounts, we have to think with the end in mind. If you don't walk away from anything except a thing of that, but you really do, especially when it comes to certain events, what information am I going to need to know for it? Or at the end of the year, and our council is getting together to do their budgets, what kind of information will they need for that? Because if they need just bottom line stuff, all right, you don't need a ton of detail. But if they need in camp certain departments and to know exactly where they, do they need to adjust prices for their store? Do they need to, are they selling enough stuff at the canteen? Or how will you know that? Well, you can do it by those income and expense numbers to kind of help gauge that if you wanted to at least know how much you've spent with it. Obviously, with canteen cards, you don't really know how much you made, but you can see how they're doing with it, how they're buying. Does that make sense? Think with that in mind. What about camp meeting or prayer conference? How much information would they need to know at the end of the event? Do we need to cut some things? Did we spend too much here? How much money came in for this mission offering? Or how much money was raised for the camp meeting itself offering? You know what I mean? Well, I don't want to have just a basic camp meeting and every service then comes in. I need to probably use a missions income account. I probably need to use a, camp meeting offering income account. I probably don't want to use the camp meeting offering income account at the same time or for prayer conference. I probably want a prayer conference income account. You starting to see what I'm doing here? So you want to think like that. And if you already have your chart of accounts, which most do, you can come in and you can adjust this, add new accounts, do those things. Now, that being said, with adjustments, if you change the account number, if I change the 4,000 account number and change that description, say I keep the number, if I change the description, do you think it's going to change it here going forward? No. You've changed that account number's description. So anytime that account number has been used, that description goes there for the account number. Well, if I change 4,000 to be 4,001, anytime 4,000 was used, 4,001 is now showing up on my ledger. Okay? So you want to think, I get asked sometimes, we want to add, we don't use this account number anymore, so can I just change the number and the name, or can I just change the name and start using that? Yeah, you can. Do you want to? Let me tell you the pros and cons of that. I don't really know many pros outside of you didn't create a new account number, but I can also tell you if you do that, keep in mind, if you were to print a report for the prior year and somebody new comes in thinking that you've always had that account number, that name, and so they go and they want to see, well, what happened for this last year? What did we do with that last year? And they print it, and it's so not that, because at that time you didn't use it. So your descriptions in the ledger or those deposits, they come and they don't match the description of that bank account or that income account or expense account. Then you're going to start to go, what happened? Why is it like that? New secretary comes in. She doesn't quite know what happened in the past. It's hard to tell. But I do know when I print this report, the description she put in versus that account number definitely doesn't match. I don't understand why she even used that account number. Well, she might have changed the name. So it's better to inactivate it and make a new one. Just make a new account number. If you're not going to use the one that you had, it's okay. If you mark it inactive right here, this little box, if you mark it, I looked at that really close. If you look at or check that box, you cannot use that account number. You can print reports still with it because you can tell it to show inactive for sure, no problem. You could do a search on it, but you cannot use it. In fact, they even have a trigger in it now that if you were to type that in or somehow have it, say, in your vendor records set to automatically create that when you write the check, you're going to get a flag that says you can't post it, you can't save this because the account number is inactive, which is great. You can't accidentally use an inactive number. So if you don't need it anymore and you wanted to try to reuse it, inactivate that and create a new one. Now you can use 4,000 and change. It's like, geez. You could do 4,000 and you could change it as long as it's not a duplicate number if like the fund balance, something like that is different. It's not wrong to use the same account number for something else if you've inactivated it. You know what I mean? You can do that. That's okay. It's not wrong. But is it going to confuse you down the road? Yeah. Somebody's like, yes. So those are the things to think about. You're not doing things wrong, but you also don't want to confuse yourself either. Or if somebody else does the position, or you're an overseer, an overseer's wife, and you know you're not going to be there very long, you know, you think you got somebody else that's going to be following. You don't want to leave them confused too. They're already going to be overwhelmed trying to figure out the system. Okay? So it's not hard, but you can do it. When you're creating accounts or adding accounts or what have you, an income account, these right here in this category or this column is super important. What this is, these are the funds that were on that balance sheet that we printed earlier. You remember how we saw the building fund was like $8,000 in the red and things like that? The income and expense numbers that are connected, so for example, we have in 4100, we have the building fund. And the building fund is connected. Let's say it wasn't. And you went and you looked and you're like, it's just constantly in the red. Why is that? I know money's coming in for it. Do you have an income account for it? Yeah, we do. Is it connected to that fund? Because if it's not connected to the fund, that fund on that balance sheet isn't going to go up. There's nothing pointed to it to tell it to go up. This is the hardest thing initially for people to grasp. That's why I go really slow with this and understanding it. If you change this, if I was to take this and change it to the missions fund, everything that's gone on income-wise to that building fund is now going to be moved to the missions fund. That's why, like I talked earlier, you had the $30,000 that got lost all of a sudden overnight. You know everything was right because you just closed the month. You looked at it all and now it's not. Well, it's because it got pointed to something different and that history got moved to that other fund. That's why that other fund went up $30,000. So it's very important to make sure you have them pointed to where you want them to go on the balance sheet. Okay? Any questions on that? Because this foundation is super important. What about categories? You have these categories. Now, categories and subcategories, they are not fund balances. Every once in a while, people can get super, super locked on these categories, that it's got to be this, but they have them all messed up in the fund balances. And I'm like, that's not going to fix your balance sheet. Your balance sheet issue is the fund balances and where they're connected. But categories can also be very powerful and helpful. Think of it as a way to sort and group things. Okay? So for example, you could have a category that said youth, and then a subcategory says camp, teen talent, junior talent. If you wanted to sort it really bad or a lot, you have girls ministry, or, and so then when you print reports, you'll see youth, and then you're going to see youth camp and all the account numbers or funds, depending on what report or balance sheet you're looking at. And then you're going to see teen talent and those account numbers and so on. You can print reports then that group up, because say you have a fund balance and you don't want to have a teen fund and a junior talent, teen talent and a junior talent fund. You just want it all under youth. No problem. You can do that. Your balance sheet is going to say it that way. It's just going to say the youth. But you could print, and we'll see later on, you can print reports like monthly comparison report or summaries, and they order them by the categories. So then I can see the youth, but in that, I can see how much came in and out for teen talent, how much came in, and it gives me those totals. So that's where categories really can come into play. Do you have to use them? It is not required. It's helpful, though. And you can change it all you want. If you want to change it, you can click the drop-down arrow, and these are the categories that were created. And I'll show you when we get to that tab how to create them. And it just moves that account number to that category. For example, if you remember on the balance sheet, remember how it said cash accounts and fixed assets and all of that? Those were categories. The cash account was the category. These are the 4 account numbers that are as a cash account. Remember how it says short-term asset and it just had accounts receivable under it? That short-term asset was the category. Any questions? Does it make sense? All right, if I see heads nodding, I'm good. No tears. This shouldn't. If we got tears at this point, we got a little more work to do. If you want to add anything, whether it's an income or expense number or balance sheet account, you can simply click Add, and then it opens up an empty row down here at the bottom. And you can choose your type. What am I doing? Am I doing a fund, an asset, or a liability since I'm in this tab? And you can change it just by simply clicking that drop-down arrow. And then you put the number you want, whatever description you want, and where it's at. Okay? And the same goes for income and expense numbers. I would encourage, before you click Add, it's just easier, do what you want, figure out what number you want it to be. I know for us, this goes back to that love it organized. If my youth camp numbers are in the 8,000s, I really don't want something to be like 8,600 or 8,601 for like the store when I had canteen at like 81. Like my brain needs all store canteen t-shirts at 81. It doesn't matter. I have seen them all over the place. But if you are one that likes things really organized, look at what numbers do I have available and either fill in an empty number or whatever the next number is. You look at that and then click the Add button and choose your type and then put in your number from there. To create your categories and subcategories, there is a tab that says Categories/Subcategories. This little drop down is where you see which ones you can choose. Okay, I want to add a new subcategory, or I want to add a new category. When you're doing reports, they're going to sort, like let's go back to the monthly comparison report that we'll show you in a little bit. They're going to sort by the code. There is no right or wrong way to code those. You can do numbers, you can do letters, you can do both, what works for you. But it is going to sort it by the code. So for example, we have cash accounts at A, short-term assets at A or A1, and the short-term assets at A2, fixed at B, and so on. Well, personnel is at H and administrative is at I. Well, if in my reports, I really want the administration one to go higher, or it bothers me that the category is not alphabetical, you know? All right, I'm so glad I'm not the only one. So if that's the case, I'm going to be alphabetizing my code and put it in order of the description so that it's alphabetical, because it's doing it by the code. Does that make sense? So if you go to print your reports and you're looking at it and it's always bugged you because it's just not looking like in the order you want it, come in here and change your code. To change the code, you just simply click into the code field and just make it whatever you want. If you want to add, again, click the add button down here and you can add a new code. And the same goes for the subcategories. Now, this little handy dandy column I want to show you guys. Have you ever had a time where you didn't need details shown on certain reports? Let's take payroll. You're printing reports for something, and they need to see how much was spent in payroll, but you really didn't want them to see who got what in payroll. Okay, I see heads nodding. So if that is the case, let's take this personnel, for example. I can click this Do Not Show Detail. What it will do, we'll leave that clicked for when we go through reports. What that's going to do is, instead of them seeing, like, let's say you had account number for your administrative bishop, an account number for your youth director, an account number for your different secretaries, for your payroll. You didn't have them all in one account number, which I would recommend separating them so you can keep track. But let's say you have them separate, and you don't want people to see, for whichever report you're doing, how much for each person or each position. But they do need to see how much was spent on payroll. If you have this checked, it's going to condense it and give you a composite view of that particular category. Category, not fund, category. So that being said, if I have my personnel to not show detail, I also want to make sure that all of my personnel expense numbers for like my salary and stuff say personnel. Because if it doesn't and my category says Christian education, it's not going to hide that. It hides any account that has the category personnel. And I know this can be very helpful, especially like there are just times we have to print reports and show people, and they don't need to see some of the other stuff. This show detail or high detail is very helpful for that, because you also don't want to not print that. You did spend the money, right? So you got to at least include that, or else you're going to give them a report that doesn't give them all of the amount of money you've spent that month. They just don't need to know who got what. That high detail is very, very helpful. If you have churches that use CDM, that's very helpful for when they're having to present it maybe to the church. There's a lot of times that we just, you guys know, I don't have to, I'm not, you guys do this every day. You get it. You know those types of things. But it's just a really important thing to know, because it really does help come time for reporting and stuff. Okay? This account browser, we're going to go ahead and talk about it since we're in this window. I live on this for certain reports. If you ever guys go to do your reports and you need to print like 4 or 5 account numbers, and you hold the control button down and you select each of the accounts, and then you miss and you slip your finger and it's off the control button and you click and you've just lost it all. Was it just me? This is before I knew what the account browser did. You can select, let me go to income. You can select them not in this one. Hold on. Now that I'm already talking about it, I got to show you. Okay, select accounts. You have these boxes. You can select them by clicking the boxes or uncheck them. Any box that has the X is selected, as if you were holding the control button down. Where this is so nice and helpful, I want to know all about this one fund, any account number that's connected to that fund. So let's say we want to do it for the special fund, the in and out fund. You just simply click this box, and it, by default, will select every single account number that is connected to that fund, even inactive ones. So if you have inactive accounts, it selects them as well. And so with that, because it selects them, you're looking to see why does my balance the way it is? Well, if I print a fund balance report and I can do that, now I know that I have it. That way, if I maybe did use the inactive account number and things like that on accident and didn't know it, I inactivated it later, it will print so I can see it. But I also didn't have to hold the control button down to select those reports. You can hit this change button and sort it different ways. So if you wanted to sort it by your categories, you can do so. And there are those 4 categories that are getting used. So if you have a category for youth and you have multiple funds, so you're just wanting the youth category, then you put the X next to the youth and it will give you every account number that you have a category for youth or personnel or what have you. Does that make sense? For me, this was helpful when I didn't have the set loaded and I didn't create a set like that. And I just needed to get a few different numbers to see. I like using the account browser the best because I just put an X in the box. Or I forget and I use the shift button and then it goes and it selects everything in between and it's just all kinds of fun. Any questions regarding the chart of accounts? I know we have a couple of brand new users. If you have the accounting and there are no chart of accounts set up, or you've kind of played with it and it doesn't seem to work, we do have like a skeleton Church of God chart of accounts set. You can reach out to us in data services. My friends, definitely love them. They can go and they can load up the chart of accounts for you, and then you can play with it there, but at least it keeps you from having to set it all up. You can at least see it, rename things that you want because you haven't used it, so you can rename, renumber, however you want, but it will help you in that case. We do have that available to you. And it's all kind of listed in this chapter 14 of that manual. I'm purposely going through the manual because we know I will fly all over the place with the accounting if we don't. All right. Let's talk about beginning balances real quick. Let me ask a question. I'm almost afraid to ask this question. Be honest with me. How many of you guys come in here every year and make the adjustments that your accountant or your auditor told you? Please tell me. Anybody? Good. Good, good, good. It does happen, believe it or not. I do not recommend it, but it can. Or if you come in here and you change the date to the new year because it's a new year. This isn't how you close the year. If I change this date to 2022, I've just told the system, these figures right here for checking, that's what I started January of 2022 with, not January of 2021. Okay? Yeah, it's much easier to come in and I got to make, in Ohio, the auditor would give us changes we'd make and we'd have to do transfers, or at the end of the year they would, the council would do transfers and things like that from one fund to the next, and you just never knew. this isn't the place to do it. Here's why. And I can't stress this enough with seriousness. You cannot print a report that shows you the changes that have been made to the beginning balance. Okay? So when a fund changes, or an asset changes by lot, and you can't find it in the ledger, but it definitely has changed, it was changed here. And unless you had paper trails that show, like approval, we do have churches that the accounting is just a mess, and the pastor says, I want to start over. We're just going to start over right from the start. Just give me a line in the sand. I don't want anything to do with that. We're just going to start over. This is a mess. We've tried to clean it up. We can't clean it up. We do that. Okay. Find what your beginning balance was for sure from the bank, and then we can draw a line in the sand. Because what the beginning balance does, you're telling the system, when I print the balance sheet, start with these figures. And then look at the ledger entry. Look at all the things that have gone on in the ledger entry up until whatever date you printed that balance sheet. And that's how you get your balance. So if that's how I get my balance, and I started my checking account with $9,500, and I have all the ledger entries, and now I've ended my checking account with, whatever, I know I can track my changes because I can print reports and see that. But if I change this, and let's say to 22, and I print the same balance sheet, it's going to be a mess, right? Because I use that asset throughout the whole year or whatever. And I know 9,500 is not what my new asset was. And I can't track it. I don't know why. So if you want your balance sheet to be right, and bank recs are one, we'll get there, hold tight. But this is very important. Do you see why, I always say this thing. There really should be this big red letters. Even that doesn't always work. We talked about that yesterday. You can say all you want to don't touch it. But I would love to just say, you can't even get into this without support. And support has to do something to get into it. Because you can bring so much damage to your accounting straight from here. I cannot preach this enough. And I say that because while we think, well, who would go in there if it does that? You'd be amazed. Don't do it. Unless you really need to, or your bank rec has been out the same amount every month for the past 6 months, and you know you're balanced. Like every 6 months, you cleared the exact debits and credits, and that's great, and it's the same amount. Well, at that point, you have a beginning balance issue. It's not right. You do need to change that because you didn't start the year out with that. So there are times that you do need that. But I would encourage you, if you feel like you need to do that, reach out to support and see to make sure. Okay? But that being said, when you do these beginning balances, this is what's telling the system when, at this date, this is the figure that I started with. Now, this is for a calendar year. If you're running a fiscal year, like say you're sticking with the church you've got and you do the September to August, you would want to have this date be September 1 because you'd start your year with September 1. It's more for when you're running I think it's the monthly comparison or monthly summary. I get those two confused every time when I teach. But you can choose your fiscal year beginning, and so that's why that's one way. It does, and it would show you either January or September or July, whatever. It's got to be the first of the month because we know your end of the months are different, right? You got September's got 30 days, October's got 31, February's got 28, or 29, depending on the year. So you always start with the first. Then you would put your beginning balances in. So for those who are just starting with the accounting, once you get your chart of accounts set up, you need to go in here and put to the best of your knowledge, where your beginning balances are for that date. Okay? Now, if you notice with the beginning balance here, it says total liabilities plus funds and total assets, and I have a zero difference. Well, that's because my liabilities and my funds added together do balance with my assets. If you have a difference there, you do need to come into the beginning balance, and you need to figure out what's wrong, what's different. And you can go in and make that change. Like, am I missing a fund because my assets are higher than my funds, or what have you? Okay? Any questions on this? Have I scared you enough that you will never touch this window? Though, they were talking, this is a good point to say. They said it earlier, and I say it a lot to people. There isn't anything you can do that we can't undo, okay? Let's take this. You change this date to 22. You go to close your periods and your years, and 21 is just not there. You'll see it in a second what I mean. And you panic. We can help you. Just go in here and change that back. Or I went in and I made changes in beginning balance. I didn't mean to do that. Now I'm a mess. I don't know what I was thinking. Open up the year and then close it again. Because when you close your year, it takes those balances and it calculates and it gives you the new ones. Or just worst case, archived and everything got archived and you didn't know that you clicked it all. You thought you only selected specific ones and it's all there and you panic because no church is in the system. We can help you restore that. I promise. Do it all the time. It happens more than you realize. But that's what the beginning balances are for. That's why they're very important. This is how you get your balance for your balance sheet, because it has to have a starting balance somewhere in your system. No matter what system you use, you have to have a starting balance, right? This is where you put that starting balance in for CDM. In checks, if you click this checks tab, you can lay out your checks. You can print them, so you can change it. If you need to change your layout of your check, you can order your full size, like full paper checks, however you want to order them. Like I know ours at the church is like a stub and then a check and then a stub. I've seen them with 2 stubs at the top and then a check. I've seen a sheet that has 3 checks on it and there's no stub. However you want. The great thing about it is we give you those options. So if you're going to add a check, it says, okay, what's the layout of your check? Are you a check stub kind of person? Or is it just checks? Or do you do, direct deposit payroll and you just need a stub? So you can create a check type that's just the stub, and it will give that to you. Okay? And then you just simply choose it, however it is, click OK, and it adds to that. That being said, you can modify these checks. So any of these boxes here, you can delete. This is a great example. How many of you guys have your checks you order from the bank and they come, as most all do, I don't even know if you can get them without a check number, but they come with a check number on them. When I first took on the books at the church, I was printing checks, and going, and I looked, and I'm like, why are we typing in the check number and the check has a check number? And the worst was when they got reversed in the printer and it was backwards and the check had it backwards, and then I couldn't just fix it in the ledger. I had to reprint the checks because we put the check number and it was not the same as what the bank said. It was a mess. You don't need to have that in there, so I needed to delete it. You just simply highlight it, click delete. Now you don't have the check number. What if I wanted to add a signature? Because I can't nail down my overseer every time to sign his checks. His stamp is driving me nuts because it's getting this weird line through it. You can have CDM print it for you. You just simply add that field. So let's add that. I'm not in my database. I'm curious. We'll see if the signature is in here. So when you click item settings, it's going to give you different things you can choose. So this looks a little familiar, doesn't it? From our notices, our little palette there. You can change the font of a writing or something like that, or customs, putting different things like these little windows here. That's what that is. There's drawing, and look, we have a signature. I figured they probably did. Click and drag it, and hope you find it. No. So click and drag it, and then figure out where in the world it went. Where did it go? Well, we'll just print it twice. Let's try it again. Let's put it like here. It goes in. I don't know where it went, but normally it's in there somewhere. We'll print a check, and it's going to have his name in there twice. But you see it. You can line it up. Let's see if they have it somewhere else. I'm not even messing. Oh, look, see? There it is. Did you guys see it? Because I certainly did not see that. See? It's not there. All right, where is it at? There he is. I'm like, dude, I know this thing is here somewhere. All right, let's bring that back up. All right. Does that ever it happened to me all the time when I worked in Publisher. Oh, my goodness. Oh, I grabbed the wrong one. See how I'm moving things. Now, that all being said, you don't see the lines of your check. All right? I'm just telling you, every check is laid out a little different in a sense. Not necessarily the signatures are on the left, they are on the right, but your little lines might be a little different, or their signature might be bigger letters than the other. So you have some things you need to adjust. But you can put it in here, you can click Save, and you can print a test. And there's my signature. What we would do is the good old print it, grab a check, put it behind the check, kind of make sure it's all good, hold it up to the light, just with the down arrow because I'm super picky. It's got to be right on the line. You can do that, but you can add a signature there. Don't add two. You do need at least a real signature, but you can do this, and it's great. Any questions on this? If you need to change it because your bank has adjusted some stuff, you can come right back in here, highlight the one that you need to make changes to and change it or add a new one. Anytime, you just come in here. We're going to hold off on the receivables. This is where we set that up. How many guys ever had, because I'm sure we're not the only ones, where the starting check number was always off and you got to manually key in that starting check number? Yeah, I'm seeing heads move. All right, here's where you fix it. Come in here, so you go to the accounting setup window, click on checks, numbers, and then you just simply click change. Key is last check used. The last one that I used. So you put in here and you put 25. Now, when I go to write checks, my starting check number for 1010 is going to be 26. Okay? So then you can fix it next year when something happens, and for some reason starting check number changes. Usually it happens when you have to manually. It happens. I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know when I've actually can tell you that this is the moment I messed the check numbers up. But man, it happens. It really does, doesn't it? It's just like gremlin that comes in. The worst is when you put it in the printer and it just prints backwards or upside down. Or my printer at the church, it was running like 20 checks. And I was pounding it out, trying to get it all done, put them all in, hit print. It was printing them great. I looked, it printed the same check 20 times because my printer was going bad. Oh my gosh. You talk about a mess to clean up. But this is where you change that check number, okay? A Accounts payable, I'll show you, this is more for mobile receipts. This is the staff member that's going to get notified for the changes for mobile receipts. That's tomorrow.